August 15th, 2024, Public Utility Advisory Board meeting started. Christina, would you call roll, please?
Brad Chance.
Here.
Michael Talcott.
Here.
Anthony Jeremita.
Here.
Steve McLucky.
Present.
Les Will, right?
Here. We'll do the other things we've got to do at the end of the meeting. For now, we're going to throw it over to DMKT to talk about the 3 studies that were done. So we'll throw it over to you guys, let you do your introductions, and we'll just sit here and let's hold all questions till we get through the 3 presentations, just for some continuity's sake, so we're not breaking these things up a lot. If you would, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name's Don Harker, founder of DKMT Consulting. My colleague Heather Bailey ran the strategic planning study and the governance study. I ran the cost-benefit analysis. We were asked to do 2 independent studies. We shared common information, but just to ensure that there was impartiality, we didn't have a lot of interface in generating. We just made sure they used the same numbers and the same basis. What we were asked to do, as you're all aware, is to not make a recommendation.
I think you're going to need to talk in the microphone for people to.
Well, there's one also at the stand.
There's one at the stand if you want to stand there, or we can stand here and hold it for you, or we'll do whatever. Tape it, just duct tape,
Okay.
be sure.
Get the logistics figured out.
There you go.
So we asked to perform 2 studies to inform stakeholders regarding alternative ownership options for IPL. We do not, and we were specifically asked to avoid making recommendations one way or the other. So we do not, in any of our reports, make recommendations. We make observations, and we do not recommend retaining or divesting of IPL in our cost-benefit report or our strategic plan. The strategic plan focuses on making IPL the best utility it can be, assuming the city retains it. So what are the benefits? Municipal utilities are typically more agile than their investor-owned counterparts. You have local control. You can make decisions, as you've seen exercised by your council, much faster than regulated utilities. You have tax-free financing. You have the ability to provide additional services. So IPL provides fiber backhaul to your schools. It provides fiber backhaul to your city facilities. Cities like Springfield provide public transportation and other things like that, all as part of the municipal utility system. Your rates and fees are set by community leadership, and you divide up your rate classes as to who pays the revenue requirements for utilities. Currently employ 157 personnel with a payroll of 17 million. The impact of losing the payroll of 17 million on the local economy is beyond the scope of this study, but we took into account the personnel benefits and things like that would have gone down if you pursue an alternative ownership structure. You have industry-leading reliability, some of the best in the country, as a result of your investment in the system and you're maintaining the system. We'll talk later about, we did an independent evaluation about the health of the system. It came in an evaluation, rough asset value, before depreciation of about $900 million. After depreciation, it came down to about $500 million in the system. That's all in the report. You provide shared services, which we've already talked about, city and school districts. And you have the ability to access the wholesale markets through your transmission system. You currently generate an average of about $5 million a year through your transmission system revenues. You also collect pilot fees on that money. Should you pursue an alternative ownership structure, you would lose access to that revenue, and you would lose access to being able to tax it through pilot. The cost of owning IPL. The electric utility industry is capital intensive and complex and getting more complex, and it's rapidly changing. There are new requirements, as I'm sure Joe has told you in previous sessions. The resource adequacy requirements in the Southwest Power Pool are increasing. Currently, you are required to have about a 15% reserve margin, meaning that if your load is 100 megawatts,
We need you to move
We
in
get
front of
you
the
to talk to
microphone, because they're not hearing you online.
There's
All
some
right.
people online
Sorry.
trying to
Okay,
listen.
I'm sorry. The industry is changing, and, for example, in the Southwest Power Pool, resource adequacy requirements are changing. For, what that means is, for example, if your load is 100 megawatts in the in your city, you would have to have generating capacity of 115 megawatts to meet the Southwest Power Pool's requirements. In '26, they're increasing from 15% to 16% in the summer, and they're also talking about introducing a winter capacity requirement. You are fortunate in the city of Independence in that because most of your load is residential, in the wintertime, you see your peaks decrease, and the winter capacity requirement is not a concern. Your neighbors, your regulated neighbors, have a different problem. And the reason this is important is when you're looking at bringing in new load, new customers to your area, the first thing that is asked is, can the electric utility serve them? And because of these forthcoming changes in resource adequacy requirements, you'll see new investment and new load slow down in surrounding utilities as they assess how much capacity they have. Through 2049, we use the net present value calculation on all these numbers you see here. Net present value is a common financial measure where we take the cash flow stream for revenues and for obligations. We discount it by a certain percentage. In this case, we use 3% to get the net present value. So through 2049, which is when all your obligations end, IPL will generate about $2.4 billion in revenue. You also have $2.4 billion in obligation through that time period. As we say in our report, there's a modest surplus of about $6 million over that 25 years, which is less than 0.2% of the total obligation, which is quite trivial. But this should come as no surprise to you because you operate IPL and you're mandated to operate IPL as a break-even enterprise. So what we're telling you is you're not generating huge financial surpluses that are going somewhere else. You're not generating huge financial deficits that the city's going to have to deal with in the future. You're operating at break-even right now, today. What would change the status quo? Well, inflation. What's the inflation rate in the general economy? What's the inflation rate in the electric utility industry? Your capacity needs. As you grow, in reports through the mid-2010s, they've mentioned the need for dealing with additional capacity needs, whether it be retiring your generation or needing more generation. You need additional capacity. Right now, you have a reserve margin of about 15 megawatts, meaning you could bring you could bring 15 megawatts of new load into the city of Independence and you'd be fine. Once you got to 20 megawatts, you'd have to start telling customers no, because you just don't have the capacity to do that. And we'll talk about it later, but in SPP, there's only two ways to get capacity. You either build it or you contract with it. And you're familiar with this through your Onetta contract where you contracted with it. You're familiar with it with your Dogwood contract where you have ownership in a gas generating power plant, and you're familiar with it through your combustion turbines. Compensation levels continue to rise. We talk in the report about the difference in compensation in the electric utility industry versus the general municipal government industry. Right now there is a shortage, a national shortage, of electrical linemen throughout the country. And they are able to command wages that reflect the skill set and the training that they've gone through to do their jobs, and their compensation is reflecting that. The supply chain issues will continue. Out of the pandemic, there were concerns about the electric supply chain issues, the huge cost overruns of transformers and things like that. That's gradually shaking itself out, but that continues to be issue that will cause rate pressure for electric utilities. Your current obligations, right now, there's $267 million in obligations on bonds tied to the revenues of IPL. Meaning that if you were to try and change the structure for collecting revenue through alternative ownership or perhaps alternative governance, you need the permission of your bondholders. And the bondholders are Omaha Public Power District for Nebraska City 2, about $64 million. Missouri Electric Commission for Iatan 2, about $85 million. And Missouri Development Finance Board, $116 million. That represents your Dogwood bonds and refinancing of 2012 infrastructure bonds. You need the consent of each one of these bondholders. The bond covenants say they can't unnecessarily withhold permission to do this. But one wrinkle is that all these bonds are tax-free, and the entities that issued them are tax-free. So who could assume this debt? It would probably be a tax-free entity. If a for-profit entity wanted to acquire IPL or portions of IPL that this debt represents, they probably have to pay for it up front. That's our current thinking. The obligations for Iatan 2, Nebraska 2, and Dogwood remain even if the power plants are shut down. So essentially, right now, you are building two coal plants. You're paying for Nebraska City 2's construction. You're paying for Iatan 2's construction. Why this is important because the federal government is passing new emission regulations for coal plants. In 2030 and 2032, emissions are required to drastically increase by 80 or 90%. To meet those requirements, massive capital investment is needed. Around the country, coal plants are shutting down. We would not be surprised to see Iatan 2 or Nebraska City 2 shut down before the end of their design life due to those requirements for additional expenditures for emissions limitations, and just due to the general nature of the economic conditions in SPP, which we'll talk about in a bit. You're also obligated to pay the O&M and the decommissioning costs for these plants. This is about $433 million. There's a question as to whether or not somebody who acquired this debt and was a taxed entity, whether they could participate as the plan went along and pay O&M, or whether they would have to put up some escrow or some other thing to meet this obligation. You have capacity contract obligations with Onetta, and you purchase power contracts with Smoky Hills, Marshall Wind. These are all probably fungible if they're in the market at the moment. They don't appear to be in the market. You have an estimated environmental liability for Blue Valley Electric plants, $25 to $50 million, depending on the level of cleanup required. For the employee health care, there's a $34 million liability, and for laggers, a $7 million. We estimated that there would be a $5 million shift in cost to other city departments if IPL were not able to provide services anymore, and that is broken down in the report. IPL is an efficient utility. When we initially started the study, the question is, everybody else says IPL is a high-cost utility. Where is the money going? And compared to your peers, IPL is efficient with the exception of generation costs, which we'll talk about in a minute. Generation costs for debt service are included in your purchase power for Nebraska City 2 and Iatan 2, and that in the case of Iatan, this is about 50% of the cost. So you can see here, at the risk of you not hearing me,
You might grab that microphone there and use it.
this is IPL right here. So here's generation, higher cost than its peers: Springfield, Evergy, Liberty Utilities. Transmission costs cheaper than the IOUs. Distribution costs cheaper than the IOUs. Customer costs cheaper than Evergy. Administration, general costs, pretty much cheaper across the board. So the question then becomes, or the question I assume you would ask is, why is IPL high cost? We think the reason for that is in the Southwest power pool market, when you look at generation, there's a resource adequacy requirement, but you are not paid to build that capacity. So what happens is this is an energy-only market, basically, and the price of energy is cheap due to wind. You know, Joe has told us, you know, you see costs of 4 cents, 3 cents on the weekends. You might see it for a penny. It is tough for a thermal plant, coal, gas, oil, to compete in that environment. One, just on the basic economics, if they could run, and the second is the way they are forced to run, with ramping up and down. Some of the plants were not designed to do that. So when you entered many years ago contracts for Iatan 2 and contracts for Nebraska City 2, it was designed to operate as a base load plant. And it was pretty much a simple bet, walk away safe. This is going to operate as base load. It's going to generate enough money to cover its variable O&M. Anytime a plant is dispatched in SPP, you are fully reimbursed. They pay for your coal, they pay for your variable O&M. You've seen this with your combustion turbines, where in Winter Storm Uri, you made about $12 million in credits above your costs because they pay for your fuel, they pay for your O&M, and you were cheaper than the next unit dispatched. But you make about, it's in the report, it's about $5 million a year in credits off your CTs. So what happens now is, take Iatan 2 for example. Wind energy is cheap, the plant is not dispatched as much. And you see this in the numbers reflected by its capacity factor. So as the capacity factor goes down, you're still reimbursed for your variable O&M costs, you're still reimbursed for the coal that's used, but what you're not reimbursed for is the fixed cost. You're not reimbursed for the mortgage. You're not reimbursed for your construction costs. And as the plant runs less and less, IPL, the City of Columbia, who's also a capacity off-taker, have to pay more to meet that debt. So that's a pressure on utilities. And it's not just the IPLs of the world, it's not just the Columbias, it's throughout the industry where these plants are running less and less. If there's still an outstanding obligation for the fixed costs, for the construction costs of it, the plant is no longer paying its way. So, you know, your higher costs, just looking at total revenues over kilowatt hours produced, higher than Evergy, higher than Liberty, higher than Springfield. And the reason for that is the fixed costs on your generation. So when you look at levers to pull saying, how can I make IPL cheaper? You know, we showed you that, you know, your distribution costs are very competitive. Your transmission costs are very competitive. Your A&G costs are very competitive. You're reimbursed totally for your variable costs, your fuel, your variable O&M. Really, the only lever you have left is looking for ways to refinance or cheapen the monetary costs of these plants. And the reason for this is, and we talked about capacity earlier on, your advantage. If Iatan 2 were to shut down today, for example, or announce a shutdown in near term, you would be forced to continue paying that debt. You would save money off the reduction in O&M costs. Turns out you would still have an outstanding debt of about $1 million a year. But then you've got to go out and find 50 megawatts of additional capacity in a competitive market somewhere and pay for that. So overall, it's not beneficial to IPL or to anybody else if they don't have physical hedges or contract hedges in place now to potentially hedge that risk of early plant shutdowns. So when you look at your 14 cents that we use, where does that go? no surprise, the majority of it is total purchase power. We've taken the debt service out of these numbers and moved it to interest and principal. Next highest is distribution cost, then your pilot, which is not an operational cost, just a tax or a franchise fee. Then comes your interest on your bonds. Then comes your capital investment. You invest about $6 million a year in the system. Then comes your principal. Then comes your transmission and your various other costs. So that's how the costs break down, and we think is the primary driver for your cost structure today. So I think we're going to take questions at the very end, or do you want to take questions on this section?
Let's do it at the very end.
Okay. So that ends the cost benefit.
Good afternoon. I'm Heather Bailey, and I'm part of the team of DKMT. And as Don mentioned earlier, my part of the project was a strategic plan, which included governance. Governance is handled separately because, one, it rose to the top as one of the highest issues that needed to be looked at, and we were asked to very specifically look at this. So this is the white paper that covers the issues that we identified. Real quickly, what I'm going to talk about are the three types of governance structure, the pros and cons, and then some examples of utilities that have those different structures. And lastly, we'll talk about some observations about the governance of IPL. I'd like to start off with this quote because I think it's really important, especially in the realm of public power. Board governance could be a public power utility's greatest strength or its weakest link. And that's very critical because the governance board or commission, whatever the structure is really what determines the future of the utility and how the knowledge of the people on those boards and commission and their vision of the future. So this is something to keep in mind as we go through this discussion. As I mentioned, there are three structures. There are city councils where all decisions are made concerning the utility, and they oversee the operations from a regulator, from a fiscally responsible way, from a community perspective, and that is where all decision-making is handled. Sort of a variation on that is what you have today, where you have an advisory board that evaluates the issues, budgets, rates, et cetera, in a level of detail that council can't, and brings those recommendations to the council. Council still makes the decisions, but an advisory board does, in essence, the homework to prepare the council to make the decision. And lastly, you've got independent boards, where it is a board that is basically independent of the city in some respects, and that typically they're appointed boards, and it can be by the council or some other mechanism. A lot of times there are qualifications that are required to be on boards, a certain knowledge of the business, the industry, something that's relevant in the decision-making process, or they can represent certain geographic or demographic regions of the utility service area. Independent boards, while they're independent, if, for example, they're a city oversight board, they still have some things that they will bring to a city council. Typically, it's only a final decision on rates, and sometimes it's a debt issue. Depending on the structure of the debt requirements, a council may be approving that. But very few things will go to a higher level entity. The boards operate very independent of the city. I've pretty much talked about these and what they are, so I'm not going to spend time. One thing, though, on an independent board model, Typically, the board hires and evaluates the performance of the general manager of the utility. They have a level of accountability that they require from the general manager, as well as the board having a level of accountability for doing certain things. Something that's, I think, very relevant to IPL and independence is that 70% of the utilities, the size of independence or IPL or greater, are governed by independent boards. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about it in the pros and cons. The 30% that aren't governed by independent boards typically require the city manager to have some sort of utility background so that there is adequate oversight. So real quickly, the pros and cons of each. City council form of governance means that the positive is that they ensure that the community's needs are met because they are the buck stops here. They make the decisions, they're accountable for that, and the thought process is that they are aligned with the community and what is important, and they have the ultimate accountability. The cons of that, especially as you have larger communities, is that a city council, as you all know, is responsible for everything. And there isn't necessarily an allocation of time based on the significance of the issue. From the dog catcher to police to IPL, which is in essence 40% of the revenues of the city, you all get this, they all get the same level of attention depending on what is the hot topic of the time. And the challenge there is that city councils don't have the time to, one, learn about the industry, and two, delve into the issues before making decisions. What happens then is that councils are forced into making decisions they may not feel comfortable with because they haven't had the time and the resources. And they will typically be risk-averse decisions, just to be, ultra careful. Not making, the fear of making the wrong decision is very important to them. But that may be to the detriment of the community and the utility. As Don talked about, things are changing. And if the utilities are not changing and responding to the industry, it can pose some real problems. The thing about an independent board, and I mentioned it already, is how the members are selected. And the quality of the board is really dependent on how the members are selected and the criteria. And many communities have charter requirements, or they have codification of requirements of who they want on their board. And it may be experience, it may be demographics, but they have a much, the requirements for being on a board are very different from being an elected office, which I think sometimes works. It can be good and bad, but it works to the benefit of the utility when you have people that have some level of knowledge and experience. I already talked about the timing and how boards, their sole responsibility is the utility. So they have the ability to spend the time to learn about the industry, to learn about the details of how the organization operates and the challenges and the issues. It's front and center. I mean, the PUAB has probably a lot deeper knowledge of IPL than the council because that is where you spend your time. The other thing that we have found, and I can talk from experience because we have clients that have different governance structures, boards tend to be more open to community input and really stress the importance of community outreach and input into plans, into whether it's generation resources, whether it's strategies, whatever. You see a lot more community outreach at the board level because they have time to do that and they can focus on that. Council is getting community input for every subject that's out there. And so targeted information is sometimes hard to get. The other thing that's really important is that boards are able to look at the long term. And they can, part of their role is to look at the strategic direction of the utility. and then to monitor performance and to hold the utility accountable. Again, I think I've already covered most of this. One of the differences in a board and the council decision-making process is typically boards are not politically oriented, and so the politics of making certain decisions are eliminated. They're much more data-driven than, say, a council who doesn't have time to look at the data and the numbers behind an issue. And boards don't get the political pressure from the constituents. So, some examples. Seattle City Light, which is a very large public power on the West Coast. I'm sure y'all are familiar. They are a council oversight. In fact, the mayor hires the general manager of the utility, and the general manager reports directly to the mayor. And so the city council has ultimate and continuous oversight of the utility. What they have done, though, is the mayor will put together, or the council will recommend, subcommittees to handle certain things like strategic planning or rate reviews, basically setting up many advisory boards depending on the issue. Long Island Power Authority is the opposite end of the country and the opposite end of the spectrum on governance. They have a totally independent board that's appointed by the governor of New York. Everything that board does is totally independent. Now, the members of that board represent the geographic sectors of Long Island. And if I recall, they also are required to have certain experience for being on the board. It's a very strong board, I'll just put it that way. And they oversee the operations of the utility. Now, when I say oversee the operations, I want to be real clear. Boards are policy-setting entities. They do not manage the day-to-day. And something that's very important is defining the roles of your governing body as well as that of your general manager to ensure that there's not that inherent conflict. CPS Energy of San Antonio, one of our clients, in fact, they also have a very independent board. Now, the board is appointed by the city council, but the board makes all the decisions on resources, rates. Now, they will evaluate and basically decide on rates. They will take those to the council, and the council is really restricted in what they can decide on. They can approve rate adjustments, but on a very limited basis. They really rely on the board's recommendation. They can look at the budget. They cannot make any recommendations on the budget. So a lot of the information that goes to City Council for CPS Energy is information, because CPS Energy is a huge revenue resource for the city of San Antonio. Their pilot is 14%. 14% of their gross revenues. But even with that, they're one of the most efficient utilities in the country and have some of the lowest rates in Texas. I attribute that to the fact they have an independent board that is very well versed in the industry, and they have terms that are long enough to allow them to get that experience. And so they focus on the big picture, the strategic direction and innovation. And they're in a city that has a lot of technology and a lot of military, and so they are forced to look at innovation to keep up with their customer base and the demands of their customer base. City Utilities of Springfield, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with, they have an independent board, and it's by charter. And they have oversight of all the utilities that serve the city of Springfield. It's an 11-member board appointed by their council. They serve 3-year terms. And they are focused on setting the long-term direction of the utilities. They establish the budgets, rates. Budgets and rates are ultimately approved by council, but on a limited basis. The board has condemnation rights and hires the utility manager. So that is a common theme that you'll see with boards. They do hire and fire the general manager of the utility, not the city. So roles, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but board members have a really significant responsibility. They are trustees of the finances of the utility. They're the regulator. They represent the community, which is very important. And they're advocates for public power. And these responsibilities are right in line with that. You know, making sure you are a fiscal agent, monitoring the utilities' financial situation, monthly financial statements, looking at projections of the future, financial forecasts, ensuring the utility provides reliable service. The goals, plans, and programs reflect the priorities of the community, which is why it's important to get community input, and making sure that, you know, the rates are fair, competitive, and that they're transparent in how they're determined. As I already mentioned, the boards set the goals, the strategic direction, and they hire and fire, and they monitor their own performance. Really, best practice is that boards once a year look at how they're performing and do a scorecard. So our observations about IPL is that there is a lot of turnover in council leadership. I mean, this is nobody's fault, but they're elected officials. And so the continuity of knowledge and understanding of utility industry issues and how the utility operates, it's very difficult. So you have a constant learning curve on the council level, which may slow down or hinder decision-making, as we've seen over time. The council has significant oversight responsibility. I mean, 40% of the revenues of the city, they are responsible for overseeing, but but they're also limited to the amount of time they can devote to that. And that again poses challenges. There hasn't been a clear strategic direction for IPL necessarily. There are plans, there's been recommendations, but there hasn't been ownership of that strategic direction. And the decisions aren't necessarily data-driven. We have seen rate-making decisions that really were politically driven versus financially driven. Again, some additional information is the financial records are not always transparent. And it's not that people are trying to hide things. I truly believe that it's city-centric, which is not always bad, but the ability to get information and relevant information for the utility on a timely basis, having people that understand and disseminate that information, there aren't the resources to do that. Lack of resources, high turnover at the city, and non-utility centric financial information really makes that a challenge. The current governance structure, and this isn't meant to criticize anybody, but this is our second round of studies, and what we've encountered is that the interpretation of the charter with respect to economic development, there's not a consistent view. Some people believe that IPL should play no role in economic development. I'm not a lawyer. I think as you look at the charter, it says IPL operates it to the benefit of the community. If bringing jobs and new business to the community is a benefit, there's room for interpretation. It can go either way. What's important about public power is that the value of public power in most communities is they use that utility to attract new business. Whether they can brag about the high reliability of their system above other systems in surrounding areas, being able to have incentive rates, provide services that other surrounding utilities don't provide. I mean, some of the things we heard from the business community was that their rates are higher for commercial industrial customers than surrounding utilities, and other utilities offer services that IPL doesn't, like commercial lighting rebates, solar rebates, things like that. Those are important to business. And so you can create the type of things that make independence attractive using your utility as a big leverage point. We believe that the public utility, the PUAB, is underutilized. By charter, you're an advisory board. I think that that's not used enough. I think you're underutilized with respect to providing information, background, and recommendations on key issues. And the administrative requirements, and this is the downfall of cities sometimes, is the administrative burden of taking things, even small level decisions, to a council tends to inhibit the efficient operations of the utility, and it takes a long time. So these are sort of the 10 tips for governance excellence. I'm not going to go through them all, but it really talks about how the board is focused on results and strategy. The general manager is focused on the day-to-day operations and delivering on those results. And in any board situation, or even council or advisory board, the general manager should feel comfortable in pushing back on things that don't make sense and giving, on it has to be substantiated with data, but that's the kind of governance you want. You want a good give and take between the two. But everybody holds everybody accountable. The council, the board, whoever, has to be accountable for the decisions they make, good, bad, or indifferent. Conversely, the general manager needs to be held accountable for meeting the requirements that the governing body sets out. Monitoring, review, regular updates, all of that is really important because that's one, it helps in the transparency. Two, everybody knows what's going on, and good, bad, and different knows that action needs to be taken or not. So I'm going to close with another quote. It says, for a successful board management relationship, trust has to be at the top of the list. There also must be an open sharing of information back and forth, and there must be a clear delineation of the board's and management's respective responsibilities. With that, I'll close. Sadly, I'm of the generation that my technology skills are quite limited, and so I appreciate the fact Dawn can do this for me. My children are my tech support system. So now we're going to talk about the strategic plan, which is one of my favorite topics when I look at this industry. And for those that don't know me, I have been in the industry probably longer than some of the people in this room have been alive. 40 plus years. I have probably served in every function of a utility except for power generation. I've been an executive over the corporate functions as well as the transmission operation functions. I helped form a transmission utility. And so my perspective about this is a combination of my historical experience as well as we deal with utilities on a regular basis, a diversity of them. And we watch the industry and knowing the past, the future is very different. And in many respects, it's harder because utilities like to move slow, be very pragmatic in their decision-making process and their movement. You can't do that anymore. There's too many things that are happening, from technology to regulation, to skill sets, the workforce. It's just a whole plethora of issues. And so I think that's very exciting. And Everybody has a different perspective on that. The agenda, I'm not going to go through the introduction because you've heard it, but I'm going to talk about the approach, the vision that you all and the people that we talk to have of what IPL could be. Well, we focused on 4 major strategies outside the governance area: financial, customer, power supply, and operations. And lastly, we took the financial model, updated it, and put in the cost of implementing these strategies to see the impact long-term, fairly long-term. It's long-term in this world, but probably for the next 12 years, what it looks like on IPL's potential rates. Skip that. Okay, y'all are very familiar with this. The way we gathered data was we had actually a strategic planning session with IPL staff where we sat in here and talked about what works, what doesn't, and what they would like to see for the future. And that was a great session. People were very honest and forthcoming, and a lot of that was not much different from what we heard from everybody else. We met with city leadership, got their input. We met with you all, many of y'all, and got your input on what's working, what's not, and what you think needs to happen. Council, we met with members of council and got input. And then we met with several representatives of the community. And in our report, there's a list of everybody we met with. And I think that was very important. We got some really good feedback that was probably not what we actually expected. Lastly, we analyzed data from IPL in the city. And of course, we used our industry sources to look at what is happening today and what needs to be done. All of that work really had a simple objective of prioritizing what should be in the strategic plan. What priorities should IPL have for the future? What we heard, I'm not going to go through everything, it's in the report. Number 1, better governance, which we've talked about, but data-driven decision-making. And I think we heard it from 2 perspectives. One, from the folks that have to implement the decisions, they want to make sure that when any of the governing boards, the council or PUAB, make a decision or a recommendation, that it's based on good data. From the other side, from the governing bodies, good data and transparency, are critical to the trust in that decision-making process. Gets to transparency, gets to running IPL like a business. Using IPL as an economic development tool, we talked about in the governance, why that is important. The idea of being able to replace and retire generation, the utility needs the ability to do that, and I think currently they don't feel that they've got that. And time is running out. As you heard from Don, it's at the critical point. IPL, the employees want it to be a place where they want to work and be their best. And that's, that is a common human desire. And so that's not any different for IPL. Talked about best-in-class reliability, more programs supporting low income, rates, better and more services. That's really been enlightening. Improved ease of doing business, which means better technology. Green power, the desire for more green power. We'll talk about that. Tools to better service customers. Okay, the hot button is advanced metering infrastructure, AMI. And I was very happy to hear so many people advocate for implementing this. This is, and you'll hear in the presentation why this is so important. What we learned, pretty much everything that I just talked about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, it's pretty obvious. So a conclusion to this is that IPL's strategy needs to focus on bringing the utility up to modern standards for a utility of its size. And that's what we're going to call foundational strategies in this report before considering implementation of suggested future strategies. in essence, IPL needs to walk before it can run. And it really needs some basic improvements. And that's not to say anybody's done anything wrong, but the lack of investment in people, technology, infrastructure has really put IPL behind. The vision, I love this. And this is all from the input of what people's vision of IPL could be. It's operated like a business, and it's for the benefit of the community. A well-informed public that understands and supports the decisions. Governing body of well-educated professionals who are responsible to the needs of the utility. Data-based decisions. Continue with best reliability. Rates, having a plan for rates to be equal or lower than neighboring utilities. Economic development, place for employees to have an opportunity to do what they do best and to grow and develop, which includes, I'm going to throw this out there, retirement is on the horizon for a lot of employees, and having a good succession plan, training plan, and bringing in new employees is going to be critical. It's the lifeblood of the utility, the employees are. Technology and the ability to add and replace power resources in a cost-effective way. This is the vision, these are the vision statements we heard from pretty much everyone we talked to, and it was really refreshing to hear a consistent message. So the strategies, as I mentioned, there's these 4. I also want to talk, before I get into the strategies, what's working and not working, which will explain why we address some things and not others. What IPL needs to keep doing, and so if they move forward in implementing some strategies, don't quit doing these things. Reliability. We heard from across the community, the reliability of IPL is great. I think that was exhibited in the results of the survey. Also, IPL has been recognized nationally for their reliability. So keep doing it, don't stop. Customer services, there are things that IPL does well. We heard from one of your big developers how responsive the crews are to their needs. One even commented it's the best they have had of any utility they work with across the country. That's a big kudos. Multiple payment options. IPL's developing things that help meet customers where they are. And then your low-income assistance programs. Those are so heavily utilized. They need to be evaluated as to whether, 1, they're accomplishing the objectives, but 2, do they need to be expanded or improved? And employees, you have a lot of dedicated and resourceful employees that have managed to make things work in spite of the limitations they experience today. You don't want to lose that. Improvement, basically, again, decision-making based on data, strategic planning, financial information, better financial information, the ability to do economic development and technology. Financial strategy. I'm going to hit on the basics. There's a lot in there you all can look at. But the learning how to walk really means that there is good financial data coming from the city system that the utility can use to make decisions and manage the business. And what I mean by that, because of the turnover in the city, it's really challenging to get some information, and we experienced that firsthand in the work we were doing. It's not that employees are bad, there just aren't enough of them. The utility doesn't have a dedicated person that does financial analysis that can get that information, disseminate it to the managers, and help the managers understand how they're operating and where they need to make adjustments. Cost of service studies. The forecast, the revenue and expense forecast, hasn't been able to be updated in 2 years. So the utility is operating on old information. It's not for lack of wanting to, but there's no one available to do that work. That's critical. You can't make decisions on old information in this day and time. We all know that. We wouldn't do that in our personal lives. Simplify and continue to modernize the rate design. That's something that IPL's been gradually doing. IPL has one person doing rate design, and he's great, but he is one person and he knows everything. He's gradually trying to migrate it. But if something ever happened to him, I don't know what the utility would do. And this again goes to my concept of succession planning. Most utilities today provide a menu of options and services to their customers. They have become much more customer-centric than the standard utility of the past, which was more, here's what we do, take it, we provide you electricity. Customers need more. Customers want to be able to make decisions and control their usage so they can control their electric bills. They want to be able to do things to improve their utility experience. And this is something that it's very challenging for IPL on two fronts. One, the limitations on the customer service group. Two, the lack of AMI and technology. Because Gen Zers, and I'm going to exclude the baby boomers, and every other generation after baby boomers, use technology in everything they do, and they're used to being able to do business. From, using an app to connect to the system or to give notice they're moving, to look at their usage, their patterns, control their thermostats so they're not using power in peak periods. That is today. And IPL has some challenges. Most importantly, AMI. Without AMI, the utility cannot get the information to provide program and rate options. AMI feeds information from the individual meter on a real-time basis when customers use power, what time they use power, how they use it, what's driving that usage. When you have that information as a utility, you can sit down and say, okay, maybe the reason my low-income customers have such high bills is because they're using power during peak periods, or they don't have homes that are properly weatherized, or they haven't had access to energy efficiency programs, or they don't have a demand response program that allows them to shut down their air conditioners or whatever during peak periods for a few minutes so they can cut their costs. These are the things AMI facilitates. And this is what is going on across the country. I think I've covered a lot of this, but one thing I do want to hit on, I know there was a lot of interest in green power. A lot of IPL's power comes from the market. SPP is 40%, the energy in SPP is 40% green energy, renewable energy. So IPL, by default, the percentage of power that they buy off the market is already 40% renewable. Now, there are existing contracts and resources that we heard about that limit the expansion beyond that. But what IPL can do is implement programs such as demand response, which is in essence green power, and that you're having your customers limit or manage their usage during peak power. Really good demand response will shave your peaks and slow down the need for new capacity. Solar panels. There are different options that can get you at a higher level of green power. We talked about economic development. Right now, the economic development rider of the rates is not competitive, and it really does need to be updated. Future strategies, again, this is once you get to the level, the foundational level, these are things to really consider. For example, right now, IPL funds its basic capital plan, the annual replacement of the transmission distribution facilities, all with current cash resources. The issue with that is you're asking current ratepayers to pay for assets that benefit decades of folks. And so in the utility industry, that causes a inequity, and that one group of ratepayers is paying for something that benefits a lot of other groups. Most utilities do not cash fund all of their capital like this. Now, if there's a power plant or whatever, IPL has issued debt. But what we're recommending is that from a financial perspective, IPL look at funding 50% of their annual capital, which is about $6 to $8 million a year, through debt. And that way you allocate the cost of that investment over time. And it gives the utility some breathing room financially to be able to invest in the innovative strategies of the future. Pursue outside funding sources. There are DOE and RA grants and loan programs out there that when you are doing new innovative investments, you can get funding to help offset that. And so that's something that needs to be looked into. And again, I've already talked about leveraging public power. Rate design, gosh, if you had AMI and some of the data that we've talked about, there is so much that can be done that will enhance the customer experience and the customer control of their electric expenses in future. Now, to do this, staffing. The utility desperately needs dedicated financial analysts, whether it's one or two, but because you want data-driven decisions, you want it to operate like a business, you need people that understand the business financially. You have a lot of people that understand the operations, but really getting to the heart of what the costs are. Technology, the technology that is used by IPL in the city is very dated. Now, you have some good software, that's good industry software. It needs to be upgraded and it needs to be integrated. So there is not a manual interface. There's an automated interface, say, for example, from the outage management system, the data that feeds it and the data that comes out. And of course, I talked about it already, needing additional rate expertise to support the person that's in place now. A customer strategy, basically foundational. There are things that need to happen to make it easier to do business with IPL. And being more proactive in customer solutions, being out there and talking to the public on what it is they need, what's working. Active communication and outreach, using all the mediums available, whether it's social media, bill stuffers, public meetings. But we talked to so many people that we were talking about, what programs do you use? They said, well, we don't know about any programs. IPL doesn't do this. And of course, we come back and talk to IPL, and they offer a lot of the things that customers are talking about they would use, but they don't know about it. So communication, building better customer relationships, key account management. I don't know, how many of y'all are familiar with key accounts? When you have a large customer population, most utilities have dedicated people that work solely with those large accounts. And what that means is they communicate with them on a regular basis to find out what's working, what's not. They give them a heads up if there's going to be an outage or any issues. They are advocates and for those customers, in that they can come to the utility and say, hey, so-and-so customer is not happy with this feature. You know, they're having problems with, momentary outages, and you need to get out there now and fix that. Or just providing information that really brings those customers close to the utility, builds the trust, and it is a great economic development tool. And this is a cultural issue, which I think is very important. Utilities typically have pretty good culture, especially public power, but there needs to be a unified value system that's regularly communicated and implemented in their personnel practices that support the ethics and transparency that will build the community trust, and that's shared not just in the utility, but by the PUAB, the city, and council. It is really a definition of how you treat customers and how you're going to do business, whether you're going to be bottom line oriented, whether you're going to be customer focused, whether you're going to be best in class in reliability. That is a really important message for everybody, and it needs to be communicated, and it helps focus the employees on their jobs when they make decisions. And then evaluating all the current programs that are offered to make sure they achieve. What we did find, there's a lot of great programs, but there weren't defined goals of what is it we're trying to achieve. For example, the iSave and the IRAP programs, they provide great assistance. They're 100% utilized. But is the goal to help reduce the number of bad debts, to get more timely payment? If that's the case, how do we know that that program's working? If it is working and it's doing a great job, should it be expanded or should other things be put in place? So that's what I mean when programs need to be evaluated and how they're operating today. So another key foundational strategy, which I think you've already heard, communication, communication, communication. The utility cannot communicate enough about what they're doing, what they're offering, because people get their information from different sources. Being able to put the information about, for example, how good IPL is in the reliability, the awards they've won for reliability, or a change in program, what services are offered. That you cannot underestimate the value of communication. Those communities who know their utility well have very successful utilities, and you've got the community behind it. And as we know here, people really like IPL and support it. Just think if you had a communication strategy that really helped keep people informed. Again, leveraging rates to enhance economic development and attract jobs. Diversifying your economy, that's key. So technology is going to be part of your, what I think part of the foundation of this. I'm not going to go through these, but I'll say app customer tools, you need to put it up there at the top of your list. From an operating perspective, your billing system needs some work. And I know the people that are working in the billing department are trying really hard, but there are technology and budget limitations. Something I'll give a perfect example that was kind of surprising to me. We talked to one of your large commercial customers. They have multiple meters. Every meter is a separate account and gets a separate bill. Over 100 bills. And they said, why can't I get one consolidated bill that I can pay? They can't. Does that make sense? No. And it's a simple technology issue. So these are kind of the things that the community deals with. They're simple irritations. They're not a big deal in the scheme of things. But again, it's an irritation. Future strategies, I'm not going to go into detail, but I've already talked about the value of customer knowledge and engagement. AMI, there's no doubt that that's probably one of the most important investments you can make. Again, the technology and the resource requirements to implement this, key account managers, a professional marketing and outreach, either consultants or employees who can help tell the story and get information out and get feedback. I really think IPL needs a dedicated professional HR person that can help develop culture and evaluate the employee issues. And I hate to say this, compensation is a big one. You're competing with the IOU to keep and hire people. As time goes on and you move more towards a technology-based utility, you've got to adjust the compensation to meet those challenges. Staffing, technology support, all of these are pretty much resource-oriented and need to be considered. Power supply. We talked about the need for new resources. We were asked to evaluate 3 scenarios. One was, what if IPL owned 100% of their generation? They owned and operated it. The second was, what if IPL was only a transmission distribution utility and purchased all of their power from another source? And the third is a hybrid. The hybrid is what exists today. And what I'll say, just in a quick statement, is the contracts in place will not allow you to be 100% owned until 2049. And so in order to convert to 100% owned generation, that's the long haul look. Conversely, you own generation. And so going to 100% purchase power is not in the near term or even long term because of the resources you already own. So really, you're sitting there with a hybrid that you can leverage and use to the advantage, because having a hybrid helps you minimize the risk on both sides. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Again, you already heard that if 15 megawatts are added in load, then you've got some real issues. The time horizon to construct a new plant is between 4 and 6 years. So you're already on a horizon you should have been 2 years into this process. So some decisions and planning need to go and get into place pretty quickly. I don't think I need to talk about this other than one thing I would think about is an integrated resource plan. Again, you're behind in getting new generation and resources available. Having an integrated resource plan means you look at all different types of resources that are out there, the customer class and usage, the growth in the demand, and the economics of those choices. And so that's something that we would recommend for the future. And IPL does have a basic plan. It just hasn't been able to be put into practice, and it needs to be updated. Real quickly, I think I've talked about, the benefits of 100% owned is that you control it. Drawbacks is it's a huge capital and O&M investment, and it's a big risk financially. Purchase power, the benefit is that you don't need to worry about operating and owning a big capital investment. The drawbacks is that you have to have an operation in place. It's basically a trading desk that has the expertise and the technology to manage and watch the market and make those decisions on a daily basis. Ensure they're getting enough power at a good price, and enter into transactions on a regular basis for IPL. The risk is that you're at the mercy of the market. When prices are low, you get a good deal. When prices are high, you don't get a good deal. And there's nothing you can do about that unless you've got the expertise to hedge those risks. And that's a pretty expensive call. The diverse portfolio I've already talked about. It just gives you a good hedge on the risk of both sides. And owning generation today, because you don't know what the future is going to hold, from regulation to technology to look at coal plants. Who would have thought when you entered those contracts that coal would be that it's out of the market from a cost perspective, and it's an environmental liability? At the time, it was a smart decision. But things are changing so fast. Owning generation, large generation. Now, investing in smaller generation probably makes sense, but that will be something that needs to be evaluated. Future strategies, increasing your renewable portfolio, and investing in non-generation load management programs. One thing we have mentioned is that risk of the long-term debt. Look at financial tools for hedging that risk, either issuing low-cost debt to put in an escrow and pay off those capacity payments early, or negotiate maybe an early payoff at a discount. I would recommend you work with your financial advisor to look at those. Or join with other municipal organizations to come together and put together some generation options. Okay, operation strategy, which is the last one. Real quickly, you've got great reliability. You just have some tools that need to be updated to enhance the operation and create some efficiencies in how the folks in the field work. Again, AMI will benefit the field crews as much as it benefits the customers. Because one of the things about AMI where you look at the cost of benefit, you gain savings because you have fewer truck rolls, you have better locational information about where outages are, and so you can manage your cost of keeping your system up at a much more definitive basis. Cybersecurity, I will say, when you talk to CEOs of utilities, this is one of their biggest worries going forward, and it cannot be ignored. Resilience, you all have already experienced. There will be unplanned events, whether weather, pandemic, whatever, that you want your utility to be prepared. It won't stop bad things from happening, but how quickly the utility comes back into operation or can come back to a normal functioning level supporting the community is critical. Safety, and this is how you protect the safety of your public. And again, I've already talked about hiring and retention, really paying attention to this and having a plan on how you're going to go forward with doing that. Resources, capital investment in AMI. We did analysis. Part of our work was to evaluate the system as part of the cost of benefit. But as a result, our team evaluated the age and performance of the equipment and came up with a capital plan that helps maintain the reliability that exists today. And we built that in. Retraining and hiring different skill sets. So here are the financial implications. We took the IPL model and updated it for the last few years, applied some growth indexes, which are today's indices. We looked at funding capital, 50% debt. We incorporated the PPA capacity in looking at how your debt service coverage, and a lot of these are financial measures which need to be considered in any decisions you make. What we found is in a status quo environment, without adding any major customers or anything changing, you possibly won't need a rate increase until 2028. Again, you need someone who does a deeper financial analysis to look at that. But in our model, 2028 is sort of that critical point. That's without having any significant load growth. And I think there we looked at over the next 5 years after that, you will need between 2 and 7%, depending on the year. And that includes implementing, adding staff, AMI, and your capital program. Overall, the finances are healthy. From what we could extract, IPL finances are very healthy. Again, we didn't incorporate the cost of new generation because that's something that until you know what kind of generation you want, you don't know the cost. But we recommend looking at that along with your integrated resource plan and having a more structured financial planning process. With that, I know it was a lot, and thank you so much for being patient and listening to it all. It's a lot of information, but hopefully it was helpful, and we'll open ourselves up for questions.
All right, thank you. Well, on behalf of the PUAB, Don and Heather, I really appreciate it. On behalf of the PUAB, I'll have to carry this around too. I want to thank you for your presentation, all your work on these reports, Don and Heather. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of detail in these reports. And I know your presentation was, hour and 20 minutes or so. But you could have talked for 4 more hours and scratched the surface on these things, but I do appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to throw it open now to PUAB comments. I can't even spell PUAB. Anybody have any questions, comments after they've gone through this information or saw the presentation? Now's the time to ask. I know, Michael, you've got some. Anthony, you've got questions?
I have a couple.
Okay, you have a question? Okay. So let's just start here. You, and we'll go this way.
Okay. I'll steal the microphone here.
Should make sure it's on.
Let me start by just thanking you as well. Really fascinating. I guess the question I'll start with is you talked about a unified value system, which seems foundational to everything else. And I just wonder if you know of utilities that are a good example that have implemented that.
I think we both can answer that one. Yes, we do. I worked for a utility for 20 years, and we had a general manager that was sort of the core of the utility, and he set that foundation. And it really was about doing the right thing and empowering employees. But it drove how we did our business and our focus. We work with other utilities that have those foundational values, and you see it in the way they operate. San Antonio CPS Energy is one of those, and it's from the board all the way down. Leadership is everything. And so when the board and your executives talk about it and live it, that's how that works. CPS Energy is one of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's others. I just need to sit down and think about some of
Okay.
the mid-sized ones that are more like you all.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. It was really, it took me 2 days, and I still didn't get every single word read. But I've got 4 questions, and the first one I can probably turn it kind of more into a comment. And the 2 things that I saw in the report was first the opaqueness of the finances, and the fact that all managers need to know the budget. So I think those are 2 important things that we need to get to that before we can even move forward, because there's a lot of good stuff. But I think we need to take care of the basics before we can, like you had said, we've got to learn to walk before we can run. And those are basic things that we need to hit. With that, my second question, with us being an advisory structure, I guess the issue that's always going to be the elephant in the room is how do we get politics out of decisions for the ratepayers, for the customers. And I'm gonna use an example because I think it fits. And in the past, our council appeared to be kind of hesitant about generation when we were talking about CTs. We had our director give us a presentation, showed how the CTs would make debt service as well as providing the generation and actually generate income on top of that. I think if we're gonna use the advisory model, then we need to rely on the advisory board more than outside. Oh gosh, how do I say it? Grassroots organizations, entities. Does that sound a little better? Okay. Because we need to focus on some generation, and that's got to be an important part. We've got SPP, we've got all of our buy-in stuff, our contracts, but we really need to do that. Now we're kind of behind the 8 ball on that now because of permits and so on. So how do you, any suggestions on that? Not any gotchas, or that's not what this is intended to be. This is intended to try and make things work better.
I'll provide some, and Don, I know, has some. First of all, engage the community. Make this a forum for people that have strong opinions about what IPL should do in the form of resources, come and talk to you and give them an opportunity both to know they're being heard, and the other is educating them on what the options are and why. Provide the data. Do that outreach. But then again, getting back to, you all had some good information and good data. And yes, when you have done the analysis and you have engaged the public, theoretically, when you go to council with your recommendation, they should feel comfortable with that. But again, it needs to be supported by data, and you need to say, hey, and we engage the community.
I think there's also the education process. I mean, as the PUAB, you probably have more knowledge of how the utility operates and what its needs are, and perhaps you don't have as larger fear of big numbers as the council. I mean, everybody wants the utility to operate efficiently and be as cheap as possible. But it's easy to confuse expenses with investments. And when you hear that, I need $100 million to do something, well, I mean, a little ground setting is through 2049, this is a $2 billion enterprise. And your $100 million investment is going to return benefits almost immediately, and you can probably meet debt service on that easily. And you're giving yourself options for physical hedges if you want to retire existing generation, and you're giving yourself the opportunity for economic growth. And you're also giving yourself a physical hedge, I think, for the day that the coal plants shut down. Because when you go into the capacity market with everybody else, there's not a lot of capacity there to contract, which is the quickest way to do it. And as we saw recently in the PJM marketplace, they have a capacity marketplace. Between last year and this year, prices went up tenfold. So those people now who didn't have solid contracts and just buy on a day-ahead market in the capacity market are paying 10 times what they did, and you see the rate increases flowing down to their customers. And you're going to see the same thing in SPP. Your surrounding IOUs, Evergy already has a rate case pending because of its dogwood purchase and its investments in the grid. Their rates are going to go up. The question is, can you look at your capital structure and make investments so you stay the status quo, or your rates go up slower than the IOUs, and 5 years from now, you're going to have a different conversation where you're cheaper.
I appreciate that, and I know that when we made that recommendation, we all felt comfortable with it because we had, the numbers were presented to us and everything, but it got canceled to the council, so the council didn't get to see the same thing that we saw. So, okay, my number 3, I'm gonna try and move this real fast. Now, in the study, you all put that it appeared like the charter was hindering IPL investments. Can you expand on that a little bit?
That's for economic development. At least my part of it, Don probably has another. In that the debate over what the charter says and allows IPL to do from an economic development perspective, the conflict in interpretations really has hindered IPL's ability to be the kind of resource that other cities use their utility for.
And the reason I asked that was because, we've got guardrails in place to protect IPL from being used as a bank for everything else in the city. And if we're to be run as a business, even since the funds are supposed to be used for IPL, with the exception of what gets paid to the city for services. then they should, I mean, I would think, like be able to work just like a not-for-profit. Not-for-profit can't make money, but they can turn it inside to use for their business, whether it's a hospital or so on. So isn't that what they should be allowed to invest as long as it's going back into the company and as long into IPL, and as long as the money that's overage, after everything's paid and after everything's put in reserve, goes back to the ratepayers.
Yes. You want to-
I think part of our interpretation is also, if we look at IOUs, you look at our utilities, they will make investments in seemingly non-utility related things to increase their load, and to increase their customer base. And so everyone benefits through the economies of scale. I think when you talk to the city of Springfield, Missouri, they mentioned that their utility bought land for future development for an office park or some other thing that was going to help them grow their load. I think that would be controversial in Independence as we understand how the charter is interpreted. So it's, you can use the same language you have now. It's probably a broadening of the interpretation, but you've got your own history on what those words mean as far as, thou shalt not spend any other money.
And think about it this way. If what IPL can do is offer rates, programs, incentives, those are all utility-based operational things. And to Don's point, if IPL can contribute to the growth and load, it spreads the cost of the utility over more kilowatt hours. And if you use your economic development, that say you're wanting to attract certain industries, maybe the economic development rate applies to industries that will bring jobs or contribute to the tax base. You can put caveats in there so that it really does benefit, and it's really still utility services.
Another example would be many utilities, to meet the lineman shortage, team up with community colleges and they fund lineman apprentice programs and an educational program through that. That's utility related. It creates a job in the local community. I think that would fall under the economic education development banner, but depending on your interpretation of the current charter, that may not be allowed.
Yeah, so there's more to it than just like an investment is like in Bitcoin or something, So that's what I was kind of getting at. And then my last one is on the AMI. And my question about that is, I'm all about technology like the next guy. However, we always hear all the good stuff about AMI, all the positive, all the, it's the next best thing since sliced bread, and I get that. But then we don't hear very much about the privacy, cybersecurity, the brown downs, the customers having to bear the expense of updating outdated electrical inside their house. The 3% increase that it shows, we've got, number one, we've got 15%, and it was you put it in your study that we got 15% of our community is at poverty level or below. So if the perception out there that their rates are just like, then when they get hit automatically with a 3% increase because of AMI, that's gonna have a little bit more kind of oomph in there for that. Then the heat pumps, we talk about doing incentives for people to either weatherize or so on. Again, we've got a lower income per capita in our city that even with incentives, you got to figure how how motivated are people going to be to even spend anything more on top of that? Then there's, instead of mandating, a lot of places have opt-ins instead of opt-outs. And Evergy, during the crowd strike hit, they were down days. Their AMI was down for days. And they've had their fair share of problems with them as far as increased repair. And we're talking millions to start this up. And a few years ago, they tried to get AMI in the city, and we had a big portion of the city that said, we don't want it. So, you know, I don't know. Maybe that's a hurdle that you have to get over. But again, all we hear all the time, and not just here, but everywhere, AMI is the best thing there is. And I'm going to say one thing, and then I'll shut up. I'm going to use my stepdaughter as an example, because she moved into just literally a studio apartment down by the plaza. Her bills, while she still had old analog metering, she was paying for that. She was bragging to us all the time that, man, my bill's only, I think it was $42, and she just cranked the air all the time. Well, they were in the process of replacing all those with AMI. So by the time she was at the end of her lease, her bill for a little, I think it was like 400 square foot studio, was like $380. And she tried to get that looked at, and they said, well, AMI, they're new meters and they don't lie. So again, I think we've got hurdles to deal with as far as the technology end of it, because you still have a lot of people that balk at that. So I'm done. I'll shut up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's probably some resistance to technology, but you know, as an advisory board, as a city, you have to come to the decision: do you want to limit yourself operationally, and limit yourself into what you can do for your customers, even for looking for alternatives of how to address different problems. For example, capacity is an issue. You know, if you don't contract, if you don't build, you go to demand side management. Now, you could hook up automated systems with your largest customers and create a demand side management program that way. They would all need AMI to do that. You could roll out programs to all of your residents where you can control their heat pumps, their air conditioners. You know, once a month, you pay them extra $5 or $10 a month. And during the summer, you know, you can curtail their load for a set period of time, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. The problem you're trying to address is I lack capacity and I don't want to, and I can't build and I can't contract. So without AMI, you just wrote that off the table and you backed yourself, in my view, further into a corner. Your ability to connect and disconnect service vastly increases, you know, and you're able to do that in an automated fashion, make it easier for people to move in, move out of the community, you know, et cetera. I mean, I think there were always going to be some people who are against the technology, and you can't say that it is without its problems. Yes, you know, you substitute sending an individual to go out there. Some people might have safety concerns about sending your meter readers, you know, onto private property and things like that. But there are a million reasons for it and a million reasons against it. You just have to decide what gives us the most options to address the problems that are coming down the road in the future.
I want to add to that a little bit. Think about the internet. You love it and you hate it. because when it works, it's great. It enables so many things that we do. But there have also been mass outages of the internet and the problems that causes. You've got cybersecurity, and you've got, in some cases, depending on where you live, reliability issues. But would you think about operating a business without internet? No. We have accepted the risk. Now, the good news is the internet has progressed to a level that the technology, the equipment, everything is so much better. AMI is so much better in many respects than it was. It is technology based, so we all know with technology you're going to experience things that you don't like, especially when you become dependent on it. And to Don's point, that's something you have to weigh. I look at AMI from a couple of perspectives. What does it enable that allows your customers to get better service? And yes, AMI may be a good reason for you as a community that has a significant low income population. Because if they have AMI, then you can identify where the high users are and then provide programs and services that allow them to manage their usage and maybe cut their bills. The other side of that, when you get AMI, you have more accurate measures of the electricity. So for some people, bills will go up. It's an enabler. It's not the be-all to end-all, but it's an enabler for a utility to do things that they couldn't do before. I also view it as a huge safety measure. It is more and more dangerous for workers to go out into the community and on private property. It really does put them at a higher risk than it used to be. Used to be it wasn't as big an issue. Today, it is. And if somebody doesn't want their power cut off, and you're sending a worker out there to do that, they may risk being shot. I hate to be that extreme, but that is a real risk. So you have to look at those things too.
You hit most of my questions. Really, the only other question I had, when you were talking about the different types of governance, and you're talking about the council-led versus an independent board, you talked about the board that they have down in San Antonio, and one of the things you said was that they're on that board for long enough that you have a kind of a consistent vision. And then you said Springfield, they're on their board for 3 years. How long, do you know how long the people are on the board in San Antonio? I mean, is it 3 years kind of a standard, or are they on there for much longer?
Well, like Springfield has 3-year terms, but they can be consecutive. You know, you can add on to that. And what they do is it's longer, I think, than the city council term, which helps in that continuity as well as removing politics. San Antonio, I know there are some board members that have been on there probably 10 years, if not longer. And so I don't know that they have term limitations. I'll have to go back and check. But as long as the council approves them, you know, they're on there for long periods of time.
So do they serve at kind of the council's leisure, or?
No.
Okay.
Once they're appointed and approved, they're there. And unless someone leaves or resigns, then no. And the board plays a role in making recommendations or suggestions on who should be replacements. So it's, you know, they look at what they need, and they know who's out there, maybe people that were very active in the community or whatever. So they work with council on identifying prospects.
Okay. I think that, like I said, Mike took most of my stuff, so.
You need to look at his sheet to make sure.
I kind of have the same concerns and questions about AMI that he did. How long has AMI been around? Can you answer that?
1990s?
The 90s? Okay. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. Reading it, you all did a much better job of explaining it than just sitting and reading it.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. McLucky has another question.
Well, first comment on AMI, since we're having a little bit of a discussion there. Having lived in Columbia for quite a while, and Minneapolis, AMI in both places, I think part of the problem we have is it's new, and something new can be frightening maybe. It was great in Columbia. They shut off our air conditioning without us ever knowing when. But it was you could volunteer to be shut off regularly, and it saved on our bill, and I could never tell you when the air conditioner had been shut off. Minneapolis as well. I think we're gonna have that problem of, this is new, there are gonna be problems, oh no. But just, my experience was nothing but positive living with AMI for 25 years or so. I came back here and was kind of shocked, frankly, that we didn't have it. Yeah, the only other question I think I had was, we don't want to ignore you and your governance stuff, and your sell or no sell and that kind of stuff, right? It seems to me that changing the governance structure is important. The Indy Energy here in town had a forum with Springfield, and I thought that they were there, they explained the system. One thing that board has in Springfield is an advisory board, which is their kind of becomes a recruitment tool to fill those seats. So you're not just asking someone to come in brand new. They've been on the advisory board maybe for years before. If you know anything more about that, I'd be happy to hear that. And the other thing I just want to say is, I think this city needs to decide on this sell or no sell fast, because what I heard from your presentation is there are a number of things that need to be happening. My opinion after reading your study is, why would we sell? I don't see how a sale would even work. I think we need to dispatch with that so we can move on with
Well,
some of the things you're
I
talking
mean, there is no, to my knowledge, there is no offer on the table, so there is no way to make an evaluation as to whether or not selling the utility is to the advantage of the city of Independence. Looking at the numbers as far as debt and your obligations, you never say never, but it is, there would be a limited pool of people who would be, I think, express interest in it. And if you were to divest ownership, you would have to look at what would they pay you and what would be the return they're expecting on that money. Right now, you're operating at break even and no profit. So it's hard for me to see how it would benefit the city. And it's also, from my experience, it's a long process. So you go through an RFP process, you establish a data room, you invite bidders. If there is interest, bidders come and look in your data room. You then go through the evaluation process on an RFP. And if you had someone who was subject to the regulation of the Missouri Public Utility Commission, there's all that set of hearings.
Right.
If it's a fair market. So you're probably looking at a 2-year a 2-year process to make that happen. And as you noted, there are some pressing issues. You've got a 4 to 6 year time horizon.
Right.
If you decided to build generation to do that. Now, you don't have to do that alone. You can do that with others. But the 2030, the 2032 is rapidly approaching. And those people who do not prepare for we think, closure of more coal plants and the tightening of the capacity market in SPP will be scrambling, and you will see their costs go up dramatically. So I think delay is probably not in your best interest.
And you haven't mentioned something that was new to me, which is the bondholders have to approve a change. So that just
Yes, you're not the final decision makers. I mean, they cannot withhold permission, but, you know, they will never endanger the stack exempt status of their bonds and, or their arrangements. I think you might find some fertile ground, and as you go through and you look at those bond issues, maybe there's opportunities for acceleration or payment. For example, your 2016 D bonds, at the time those were issued, the city must have needed funding in a hurry because it's a leasehold on some of your assets, some of which have since disappeared, but you're paying interest only. You pay $1.7 million a year from now through 2038, 2048, and you've been paying interest only since 2016. You know, if you looked at restructuring where you could possibly start paying off some principal, that may
Right.
behoove you.
Thank you.
And to answer your subcommittee question, the first one, that's something that all kinds of boards leverage. They set up committees that may be limited in time, single-purpose committees to address issues. For example, if you're putting together a resource plan and you want deep analysis and input, maybe having a subcommittee of key stakeholders do that. I think committees also, to what Springfield does, are great training grounds for future board members because in the best world, you have people that come onto your board or committee, advisory board that already have knowledge and experience in the issues facing the utility.
Brad, anything?
You seem to favor the idea of an independent board. You thought it would give us a little more accountability and that kind of thing. I'm ignorant enough to know, how does that process even start? Or is that a way down the road question?
And we do favor it only because what we've seen operate, the utilities that have independent boards tend to be the best-in-class utilities. And I believe part of it is the governance and the cultures, and you know, there's a whole host of things. What those utilities that have them, though, it's either in their charter or their bylaws or some form of governance. Absent that, I'm sure IPO would have to go through a process to be able to create that. And I don't know the legal ins and outs. At the end of the day, any structure is only as good as the people that are on it. So if you have people on an advisory board, city council, or an independent board that are knowledgeable, qualified, and have the time to devote to analyzing key issues and understand them, then you can make those entities successful. Council, you can have a lot of smart people, but they just don't have time. And that's really the bottom line. If you have an advisory board that council truly relies on to deal with the big issues, and so that council doesn't, and they bring those recommendations fully vetted and analyzed, and council trusts that, that's an option. But it's a function of that relationship. It's a function of trust, transparency, and the people in those positions.
Thank you. Before I say anything else, I want to turn it over to Jared Fears, our council liaison. Any thoughts about the topic at hand? Don't give me the
I have lots and lots of thoughts.
I know, that's why I narrowed it down.
But I think, you know, and I just want to say, first, I appreciate the presentations. I appreciate the invitation to ask questions. I think what I would prefer to do, because I know you're coming to a study session in a week and a half or so, I'm going to just prefer to delay any questions. I want to look through the material closer than what I've been able to so far.
Okay.
And then I'll bring them back. I've got lots of questions, but I really do appreciate it.
It was a very detailed report. Joe Hagendeffer, Director of IPL, anything you'd like to throw into the mix?
No, I mean, other than thanking DKMT for their time, energy, resources towards this. I know they spent a lot of time, they talked to a lot of people, right? So that's really important. They didn't just come and focus in on a small group. They talked to internal and external stakeholders throughout this whole process. And I do want to thank them for their time and for the detailed report that they did provide. And then their time and energy coming here, and then they're going to be at a study session for the city council to, again, give this presentation and answer any questions. I don't have anything additional to the report.
Okay.
I think it kind of stands for itself.
Okay, very good. Well, I do appreciate your time to do this. I appreciate everybody here on the PUAB that's in here to listen to this. Preparing for today's meeting, I read through all this documentation, started having flashbacks when I worked for the utility, and then remembered, oh wait, I'm retired. I don't have to get all upset about this. But then I went back and I looked at the April 5th, 2023 City Council meeting where this issue of what to do with IPO came up, and really looking at this whole topic. And there was a non-ordinance issue council action passed to take the sale of IPL, I think it was worded, to the vote of the people. After we go through and do all these studies, let them decide. What I would like to do here today, you know, a couple of things that were said in that meeting. Mayor Allen wanted to define the reality of IPL, and I think that did that very well with the numbers and the flow of information. What's best for the citizens? We keep talking about what's best for the city. We've also got all the ratepayers out there. What's better for them? Mayor Allen was looking at 20, 30, 50 years out. Well, you know, some of the benefits he pointed were benefits of ownership, improve reliability, lower rates, and that's something that we'll just continue to work on around the rate structure, because in the report it says we're high, the ones you mentioned, but then I went out last night and looked at 2 or 3 different sites and saw we were middle of the pack. So I guess it kind of looks at the data that they're providing and the fruit salad, whether it's an apples to apples comparison or apples to oranges. And I've done a lot of surveys in my career of where a lot of people do not do straight apples. They mix in other stuff and omit other stuff. So, you know, are we the high cost, low cost, in the middle? I guess that's subject to interpretation depending on who's reporting the data and what they're reporting it for. What I would like to do here at this meeting, after looking at all this data and doing a lot of research and things and really thinking about this, is I'd like to make a motion that the PUAB recommend to the city council that we do not take this to a vote of the people. We rescind that non-ordinance issue. They rescind it based on the fact of looking at all this data. I equate it to being almost upside down in a car loan. There's a lot of money that this city would have to pay out or get someone else to pay. You know, I've been through a lot of mergers too with other investor-owned utilities. And the Public Service Commission, if an investor-owned utility were to buy us, they would be involved. And they'd be looking at the premium, as they call it, that they're going to overpay for the taxes and different things and that whole quagmire that gets involved. So I'd like to make a motion, and I'm not sure how to word this, so I'm going to look to everybody in here to kind of throw words in, that the council rescind the non-ordinance issue, not take it to the vote of people. It's a dead issue. We let IPL run IPL and get out under this cloud of, are we going to sell or are we going to keep it? What are we going to do? Because everybody's stirred up. Everybody just knows that IPL is going to be sold. Well, there's some serious deadlines we've got coming up. That do we put all our effort into selling it, or do we put all of our effort into making it a best-in-class utility to serve the needs of this community and the citizens? And I'd like to see, and I'm not sure if that's the right wording that covers it, just the non-ordinance issue that they passed to take this to a vote of people be rescinded, and we get IPL out from under this cloud of selling it and let them run the utility. Is that?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So I just want to make sure I understand
Yeah, I'm
your
not
motion.
sure I understand.
You want them to rescind the non-ordinance action item and take even selling IPL completely off the table?
Off the table. Let's move forward. Let's put the money into what the utility needs to make it the best it can be.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Is there a third? Oh, I'm sorry. Now discussion.
Mr. Chairman? Go ahead.
Okay, go for it.
Go, I'll wait.
No, I was just gonna ask, and as part of your, letting them run it and do what they need to do, how does that affect, like if the city wants to parse something out?
You mean if they'd like to,
Split it, do something like that?
I'd say that's a decision that the governing board, in that structure, whenever we set it up, the PUAB and IPL work towards that, not just somebody getting them, hey, I've got a buddy that has Lyman, we're gonna just outsource that whole thing.
So does that need to be in the motion, or?
How would we add that in there? I'm all open to it, but I'm not sure.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm full of
And
ideas.
I'm not sure you can specifically put that
Yeah.
in there. Because part of the motion was to let IPL run IPL.
Right.
And.
Oh, yeah.
They
I-
would,
Without interference.
Exactly.
That's the thing. That's what I want to make sure.
Mr. McLucky?
I guess I'll call this a point of order. I believe the chairman can't make a motion.
Oh,
So
did I say I was making a motion?
you did.
Would you like to make that motion?
Well, I see a microphone going on over here, so if
Okay.
someone else would want to make the motion and do the second, then I think we'll be official.
I will make a motion
Based on
for-
what he said.
for, what, do you have, what on,
I-
non-ordinance action item was? On what date?
April 5th, 2023.
That the non-ordinance action item concerning the sale of IPL made on April, what was the date again?
5th.
April 5th, be rescinded and the sale of IPL be taken off the table.
I will second that motion.
Okay. Now, does that make sense to everybody? Is the wording sound clear?
Appropriate.
Okay. So we've got a motion on the table. We've got a second. Any discussion? Okay. Christine, would you call the roll, please?
Brad Chance,
Aye.
Michael Talkett,
Yes.
Anthony Jeremita,
Yes.
Steve McLuckie,
Aye.
Les Boatright,
Yes, that motion is passed, so we'll get that sent up to who the council have already heard all the discussion. But I just think with the information that's in this report and just what it shows on numbers, we're gonna be better off to invest the money in running it instead of trying to get somebody else to come in here. Information I've looked at when I've researched the topic of municipals that have sold and gotten out from under their utility, their electric utility, they've regretted it within the first 5 years, and their rates went up at least 30% on the rate because of the stuff you'd mentioned earlier, the premiums they're paying for different things. So they've got to recover that money somehow. And so it's usually on the backs of the ratepayers, and I don't want that. It's always on the, yeah, it is. Okay. All right, so I appreciate y'all making the motion. I wasn't sure about making the motion. And so I thought, well, I'll throw it out there, and if it's not right, somebody will tell me. Thanks. Okay, so that covers that part on the presentations. Let's go ahead and finish out the rest of this month's PUAB
Excuse
meeting.
me, Chair, can I add one thing?
You
please?
may.
Now that the presentations are over and y'all have had your discussion, I would like to commend the staff of IPL, and especially Joe, who took over kind of partway through our study. He has really tried hard to begin implementing some of the things we talked about. And in fact, the feedback we got from the community is they really appreciate the fact that he's done outreach and they've talked to him. And so I think you all are already on a good path. And I feel comfortable saying that now because we've given our presentation from that perspective, and no, he didn't pay us to do it. But we have had really good feedback, and the staff of the utility and the people that we have interacted with have been pretty phenomenal and forthcoming with the good and the bad news. So I just want to thank the IPL folks for that.
We appreciate that. I know we've had several storms this summer that has really shown the value of IPL. Getting out there, responding quickly, and really heard nobody really complain about it. They all commended them for the response they gave. And, you know, if we sold out to another entity, we wouldn't get that kind of a response like we do with our homegrown utility. So, Mr. Hagendeffer, appreciate your efforts and all your staff and everybody that works at IPL.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so moving on to the other reports now. Financial and admin, the interim finance director was off ill, but she did supply a packet here, so what's been asked is we take a look at this end of year financial memorandum, go through it with the financial reports. If you have any questions, that we'll cover it at the next month. So, and anything you'd like to add to that, Lisa?
No, that's fine. I was just gonna point out one of the things that she mentioned for both water and sewer were that they were well below budgeted amounts on the expenditure side.
Okay.
So just for your guys' information, that was largely due to salary savings from lack of being able to hire people, and also capital projects. Many of them were in design, but priorities were shifted mostly to federally grant-funded program or projects that had hard deadlines. So things related to streets, bridges, and stormwater. So while the water and sewer projects are still moving forward, most of them got a little slowed down and are in design phase. So those big funds for construction haven't been encumbered, and that's the bulk of that lower expenditure fund or piece.
Okay.
I could say for IPL, she didn't say the electric, but I'll just say the word ditto, because really we're in the same boat.
Okay.
That operating expenditures were down due to some capital projects. So Substation S specifically was about $10 million. That got pushed from last year to this current fiscal year's budget. So that got shifted. And then, yeah, we had a shortage of engineers for quite a while, but our operating expenses were down for that, but we had to contract out.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Just a quick question. Substation S, will that be the new one for North Point?
Yes, it'll be, it's kind of changed its location a little bit, but it is still out east of the power plant, out there in that area between there and Lake City. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything for municipal services or IPL on top of what we've talked ad nauseum today? Nothing? Okay. Assistant City Manager, Assistant Grand Puab.
Nothing more to trouble you with today.
Okay, thank you. Anything from board members? Any comments, questions?
Just thank you again. Your time really showed the results.
Okay, nothing else. Our next meeting is September 19th, 2024. Looking for a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Okay. Everybody seconded that one. I do appreciate your time. I know this was a long meeting, but it was a very important one.